Welcome to the Civic Pulse with Brian Brady and David Bonnier, where we talk about current events, elections, and issues that we care passionately about from a progressive lens. We're really excited today. We have a fabulous guest, Jackie Kaplan-Perkins. I've known Jackie for 20 plus years because we've led parallel lives in Chicago nonprofits and community leadership. And Jackie currently is the director of philanthropy at the Movement Voter Project, but was active with, led the Human Rights Watch in the Midwest for countless years, and has just worn a lot of hats as an activist and as a nonprofit leader. So Jackie, welcome to you.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here and finally meet, Brian, I've known you forever, but finally meet you, David. I've followed you for a long time.
Nice to meet you. So we look forward to learning more about what we're going to do.
David, I was thinking we should rename this the Civic Rebuild and not the Civic Pulse, because it seems like our project is now rebuilding. So Jackie, 3 weeks out from the election, how are you feeling? How are you coping? How are your friends and family dealing with this?
Such a good question. I'm feeling resolute, and I feel like it's all the R words. I think that I am ready to resist and rebuild and reframe, and we need to keep on going, and we don't have an option to stop doing this work. And I know we'll get into a lot of conversations about how and what, but like many people, I needed to take a moment and a pause and reflect. And that's another our word, being reflective, and figure out where I think personally my energies and what I can bring, and what various communities. I have to say that I have on a personal level, so that's my personal and my professional, like all three of us have always blended together. There's no way to separate it. I've had to have conversations with different people that I don't get to leave this at 5 o'clock to say, okay, well, I'm not going to think about this anymore, or not talk, or only talk about it with friends and then not talk about it during work, and it being, the state of the world. But I also think that is an incredible, wow, I'm really grateful for that. What a privilege it is to get to wake up every morning and be in this and be in community with you all. The last thing I want to say is that I am really, really, blessed to have a number of, I'm part of the LGBT community, that I've MVP. We have, I would say, Movement Voter Project, where I work. I think probably about a quarter to a third of our staff are trans and non-binary identified, and these are folks in leadership roles, and they're scared. They're really, really scared. I also have a number of colleagues, a few colleagues who are DACA recipients, and friends, and they're scared. And holding that space is real. On a personal level, I feel like we will be okay. My wife, my son, and I will be okay. But I'm not sure my community will be.
Dive a little bit more into that, Jackie, in terms of, just to be specific here, we're talking about possibly mass deportation of 1 million plus immigrants. Who knows who they'll sweep up? We know from history that people who are documented get swept up in these
of course.
And these families get torn apart and kids get left, all these horrible things happen. But then also on the LGBT side, we're seeing immediately the messaging, the demonizing of trans folks immediately by this new administration and its followers, right? So how are people looking to organize?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I want to say. A really great article that was written in the New York Times this weekend was by M. Gesson, who, formerly known as Masha Gesson, from Russia, who I have a lot of Russian ties. Our son was Russian born. We have a lot of friends who are Russian activists. I did some work there that led us to our adoption of our son 20 some years ago. But they wrote this great article about how now even, Democrats are saying, oh, we went too far with the trans and, the community. We talk too much about these progressive values. And we're thinking, no, because trans rights are our bodily autonomy rights, right? Like there's this whole thing around like the armchair quarterbacking in or Monday morning quarterbacking, whatever, that people saying, we've gone too far on some of these issues. Actually, one might argue that we didn't, you know what I mean? This just because it just is, right? They are members of our community. But we can talk, certainly more about issue-based things. I think what I'm hearing from folks, I talked to one of my colleagues who I'm very, very close with the other day. We were talking about this huge donor briefing we're doing on something else because of what they run for the program. And, big foundations are coming this thing. And I was just talking about their role. And then just finally was like at the end, how are you? And they are parsing their hormones now because knowing that they live in a southern state won't be able to get and what that means and what danger they are and their partner asking them to take a gun, a class on how to use guns, right? Like crazy. This is not that, we were joking about them, knowing how to use a softball bat because they used to play in the that sort of thing. But these are the people in my life, the people that I care about. So I think we're, in that way from the LGBT community, especially the T and people who want to have some sort of reproductive justice, we're just going to see more people die. That's just it's a terrible thing to say, but there will be, there's going to be a lot more people getting sick, dying. And I think the other thing, if we're not going to be, and that, it sounds dramatic, but we know it's true. We've already seen it in states that have had reproductive justice restrictions, what's been happening with women's health. The other thing I think we're going to see is a lot more, what they're called internal refugees, if you will, of LGBT folks moving to blue states. Right. So I will say, and I mean this in all seriousness, donors, Brian, I had conversations with them who have queer kids who are adults and people who have a tremendous amount of resources, right? Their next generation of wealth, who they are fleeing states, because they simply don't know if they're going to be safe or if their kids are going to be safe. My wife and I woke up, the first day and talked about, okay, so what happens when marriage goes back to the states? If in the worst case scenario, we lose our federal benefits, what does this mean? Because my wife is a senior attorney at the city of Chicago for the last 30 years. We've bet our whole future on her pension. What would that mean if something happened to Anne? Should we redo the house in our son's name? This is us, right? These are our friends, but again, knowing that we're at a different point in our lives, right? Like the chances that we've been building for a while, but we know the next generation of folks may not have some of the benefits that we at least got to experience for a while, and it helped us build our nest egg, et cetera. That's in that piece is sort of the LGBT piece. For the immigration things, I don't know much. And this is not my area of expertise, but what I do know is we all know, and we're preparing, there will be a huge, he said he was going to do it on day one, and there will be some image. We all know this, right? That will be the image. He will come through with some mass deportation using federal resources to do it. And we're going to see people in what will equate to concentration camps, right? And we have I have friends whose family were in Japanese internment camps, right? Whose parents were. So we're not even a full, we have many living people who lived through this who are going to see this happen again. It's not like our country doesn't have a history of this. So I don't know what it looks like, how groups are organizing. My experience, and again, right now, what I'm hearing and seeing is right now they're really checking in with each other.
Mhm.
I know MVP is trying to do as much legal support as we can, as much trying to figure out what we can do to keep people safe. We have a capacity building program, which I think, when people sometimes hear capacity building, they're like, oh, they help them with their fundraising or setting up websites. The number one thing we've been funding, and this has been for the past like 18 months, is first was digital security and now is physical security.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, it's still playing out. I mean, it's obviously playing out, and I think you'd have to talk to the groups specifically to figure out exactly what they're doing. But we know that they've been planning. I think the last thing I want to say, and I really want to hear from you all too, is that I think what sometimes I think those of us on the sort of the sidelines, or not, none of us are on the sidelines, but those of us who aren't necessarily in the communities of which we are speaking and aren't as marginalized, don't understand that they've been planning. Like, they heard the rhetoric and didn't think him saying that they're eating the cats and dogs meant people, oh, no one's going to vote for him. No, no, no. They were listening and saying, like, how are we going to protect ourselves from this?
Mhm. The Movement Voter Project is a great organization. I'm a donor, and tell us a little bit about how that work has been going on and how it might shift. What are some options that the team is thinking of in these era? And love to hear about that.
So Movement Voter Project at the heart is we organize resources for community organizing, right at the heart, and really for marginalized communities. I personally, I got a call 6 years ago from, just under 6 years ago, from a man named Billy Wimsatt, who was the founder. Many people know him as Upski. He was a pretty well-known tagger in Chicago. Anyhow, Billy is definitely a visionary, and he said, hey, I think we could, I really want to move money to communities, not candidates, right? And so we got a bunch of people with a profile, I think, like mine, who had networks in their communities. And really, we became sort of free donor advisors, right? We just wanted to talk to donors. There were some people we get paid, right? There were some people who, paid for operations and salaries, but I could talk to any donor and say, what are you interested in? And let me tell you of groups on the ground doing this work. And our first initial goal, I think, was 30 million. We hoped to move in 2020, and we ended up moving 120 million when you included the runoffs in that January of 2021. And I think what happened is as you get larger, you go from being the icing on the cake to the actual batter, right? Which is one of the things you want to think about. And we brought a lot more donors along in a lot of different ways. In part way, I think the pandemic actually helped, because we were able to people were looking for something to do, and George Floyd was murdered right at the beginning of the pandemic, and people wanted to do something. And so we could start to do these online events. We did house parties that were online. And we ended up getting lots of donors at lots of levels who felt like they could do something. And then they started organizing their friends to do it, and so on, like that old Fabergé commercial. I think what at MVP's core is what we need to almost like double down on. And that is, we raised, just the campaign alone for Kamala raised $1 billion. I just want to think about what we would do if $1 billion went in to address some of the issues we were talking about, right? Like, as people have been doing this all of our lives, you're like, well, politics costs money, right? But the thing that MVP has said forever is, what if we invested in communities so that they still had something after the election, right? And I think one of the things I remember is Latasha Brown, who is one of the co-founders with Cliff Albright of Black Voters Matter. And the first check that was ever written for Black Voters Matter was by MVP. And we had her on a briefing not long after George Floyd was murdered. And I think she'd been asked to do a million things. And she said something because some donor said something like, I don't really want to hear that people are exhausted. We want to hear what they're doing. And she said in response, so many people only care about the Black votes, but we actually care about the voters. And this was very early on, in, I think, 2019, 2020. And I think what really got me about that was that is actually what MVP's model is. And I think if I'm going to say anything about the Democratic Party or anything that we've lost, somehow this idea that we just need the Black votes as opposed to really caring about the Black voters, that we need, it doesn't equate. And all these ads and ads and ads, all the money that went into the ads, how did you then help the communities that you were purporting to want to help? Like, I really don't agree with that. I was fortunate to be, my wife and I gave the most we had given in a while to Harris as well as to MVP, but we were very excited about this campaign, and I got invited to some sort of high-level briefings. And I remember, and I did get to go to a briefing with David Plouffe, and who was really smart. But I also thought, like, even he spoke of the votes, not the voters, the demographics, not the communities, right? I think that, and this is a guy who worked for Obama, right? Who ran that brilliant campaign. He understands what organizing is, right, at its very core, and somehow missed the key, or not missed, but some of it was missing what it meant to build the infrastructure of these communities. How is it that I was in Flint, Michigan, and I was working, volunteering, that part of my job, on behalf of the campaign for a few days. How was it possible that there was no infrastructure in Flint, that the people who were helping out in Flint were from California? They were leading that. But I could tell you that MVP, on the ground, our groups had people from their communities knocking doors on people they know. That's what makes the difference. We know that. It is,
Yeah.
I influence my community and other people, and not only that they influence, but I can try and help them when they need groceries because their mother is sick, when they need, all the things we know that we do. Um, it's 9 a.m. in Chicago, and I've been on a text stream with my 20 of my neighbors. We're on a text stream every morning. We call ourselves the Summerdale Sisters, and it's who has eggs, who's doing this, but somebody's sick, somebody has COVID, and how we kick in. And we talked about the election, and they took my wife's recommendation for the judges, right? Because those are the things you don't know. Anyhow, so that's the thing, is that I think we sort of lost touch. We as a party, if we're talking about Democratic Party, has really lost touch with the basis of community. And so it was a long way of saying that our mission at MVP hasn't changed. It is understanding that our job is to build the power of these groups and the capacity for these groups to one day not need all these outside resources, one, but two, to be able to at least be seen as a power base to people in power as well. And three, actually, most importantly, I'm going back, sort of reverse order of what's the most important. The most important piece is to be able to take care of themselves, and to help each other out. And, that's at the heart. And so I think MVP is really wanting to make sure that we are caring for our people, first and foremost, and making sure that they are okay, that they are safe, and that, their power, that they're there. And after that, we really work with them on building power.
Yeah, I would say to that, and I think that's really a great principle to try to spread throughout the party and the country. This is campaign should not be a 6-month or a year endeavor in the community. It should be integrated, as you were saying, within what you have been doing with the community for hopefully a good length of time, that develops relationships that will actually get the results at the electoral end of it and make a difference for that community, and that they will make the difference in their own lives because they have been participating. So I couldn't agree with you more on that approach, and that's a pretty significant approach to try to sell that to people. But you've done it. You've done it with donors, and you just gave us an example of it during the COVID. So I think that's something the party needs to look at. I mean, we need to do a much better job of, for instance, door to door. Door to door is, when I was running and involved in politics as an active politician, that was just very basic and key. Everybody did door to door if you wanted to be successful, at least for the first couple of times out. People got to know you. But then you have to keep that up. You just can't just, divorce yourself from it. That's got to be a part of the community activity and your activity as a campaign. And that's, House members run every 2 years, senators every 6. So it's harder for them to keep that process up. But if you're in a swing district like I was in, you have to keep it up for political survival. But more than importantly, it develops the sense of community that's necessary to make a difference in people's lives, and for them to have confidence in you as a political person and an entity, or a political leader for that matter.
I'm biased, as we know. I was Jan Schakowsky's finance director when she first ran and won for Congress, which now is, oh Lord, she won in 98. So that's a minute ago. But I think one of the things that you will say to anybody in Jan's district, and David, my understanding from the people I met who were in yours, is that they felt like they had a personal relationship with her, right? That they could call her. It is very, people will call me to connect with Jan if they're outside of her district. They might say, "Oh, can I have a connection?" But inside her district, they're like, "Oh yeah, and I know Leslie who runs her, off." Like everybody knows everybody, and yes, that's over time, of course, but it's because she has always been available, and so that is one of the things that you also understood. And people look to community leaders, so, and now that everything is going to go back to the states, that's going to be more important than ever, right? That we understand our communities. Yeah, it is to me just devastating, the amount of money that went into ads and this and that. And that
It's repulsive, actually, when you think about
repulsive is a good word.
It's and we've got to change that. And you do that. It's hard work. I mean, it's not easy work to do it at a grassroots level. But once you do it, it becomes part of your family, or your group of people that you want to be close to, and then it becomes enjoyable. But you got to do the work first, and it just doesn't come because you want it to happen, and it's not going to come because somebody's got a ton of money that they're going to put ads on TV by itself. That helps, but when I ran, Brian has heard this ad nauseum, so he can tell me to be quiet. When I first
That's a good one.
In '76, we had a big ice storm in Michigan, and it killed trees all over the state. It was the biggest storm we had, and I was an environmentalist in the legislature, like Jan was in Illinois, and so I had a bit of a environmental reputation. So when I ran for Congress, I was an underdog against the state senator and the national committee person and all that. But we won, and the way we won is that we passed out little pine seedlings, about 18 inches long.
I love this.
500 of them for $40, and we passed out 70,000 of them going door to door. And we developed community within the campaign office, because we'd have auto workers here, we'd have people from the Muslim community over here, and we'd have environmentalists over here, and they were on this assembly line working and then talking to each other and getting to know each other, and it was fascinating for them to learn about the different parts other people's lives. But the thing that I want to emphasize is that we kept that up. Twice a year, we would pass out trees in the spring and in the fall. We'd go into schools, all the schools in the district, and we do environmental programs for kids and for teachers. We got the teachers involved. I mean, it was a whole big piece, and that takes a little. I tried to sell that idea. You know, I was there 26 years in the House, and I tried to sell that idea to people. A few people did it, but I couldn't get an interest from most of my colleagues because I think that it was just too much work.
Can I do a amen yes, but a yes and to this?
That's
To
very
push
Chicago of you. Yes.
I want to push you both because what Larry Cohen was on last week from Our Revolution in similar thought. He's like, we have to run a 3,000 county. Every county in the country, we need to be organizing all the time, everywhere with local leaders. So very much, I think all of us are for the grassroots. However, this, part of the reason we're on YouTube with this show and we're actually trying this show is we know that people's intake of information is dramatically different than it was in 98 and 76, and that they're forming community online with, and our young men who voted surprisingly a bit too much for the other guy are taking in their information, and everybody is differently.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll ask you first, Jackie. How do we also? Yeah, we need to be old school, but we also need to be new school. And how do you do that? Both those things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm the one at 56 and a half, 3/4 that I'm the one to necessarily answer that. I mean, I think, look, people have asked me. I am well known at being a successful fundraiser in Chicago, and people have asked me, how do you build, how do you do that? And is there like a magic list? I think people think that I have a magic list. And I say, all I know is that you build a relationship one at a time, and just like organizing. And that's how I do it, and that's how I know it, and that's how I think you move, major money, and you move and so, but yes, there are communities, right? Or your dinner, then you expand that out to your community. What we used to have is the dinner party, the this, the that. I do think the pandemic changed how and who we build community with. I think we were doing it anyhow. And I think that still it's the people that you know and trust. And when you don't have some of that, I think what happens is you start to listen to the Joe Rogans or the other people. They become people you trust, right? Because you're listening to them. It feels like you have a relationship with them. And we can't discount that. So I agree with you. There is a yes and. I'm not saying you don't do any of that. That's not at all what I'm saying. I think all of that stuff is really important to get to different audiences. And you can't necessarily knock every door. What I'm saying is that there was, a couple of things is, one, I think that the donor class, if you will, and these are, the people that I work with and talking about, there is something really about, so MVP moved $165 million this year. Amazing amount of money to move to community organizing. But again, when you think about what it was, the billion was just what the actual campaign, I think they say up to maybe another billion moving in other groups that are affiliated with ads and that. I think we need to talk about how we shift our resources a little bit. I also think that donors right now, we could be in danger of donors right now doing this and saying, well, I tried it, it didn't work. And just to kind of go back, because I know you're asking something that maybe I don't know how the yes and piece, because I'm with you. But just to go back, like one of the things I realized when I was at Jan's campaign, and at the time we raised $1 million, which was the most then for a congressional seat. That'll tell you how long ago it was. And she was running against one of the wealthiest men in the world and a machine politician. So there was a lot of resources going into the primary. And I remember very clearly thinking, I became this sort of wunderkind. I mean, I'm not kidding. Everybody's, oh, she was Jan's fine. People will still sometimes introduce me like that. And I'm like, yeah, it was 30 years ago, but thank you, like, I think I'm older now than Jan was when she ran. And so, but I remembered thinking I could have raised the exact same amount of money. And if we lost, I would not at all be seen, nor would Jan be seen as the prolific fundraiser that she is, no matter what, the organizer that she was, no matter what, right? And that's the piece, is that we have this like winner takes all attitude too, which may also
Mhm.
come from some of the media. Um, we won a lot of things at a lot of levels. Our groups did, communities did. They also lost a lot of things. I'm not saying that they didn't, but we also don't understand that some of the incremental things that we happened because of what happened on the ground. You look at something like, you know, um, Montana, there were state houses that were flipped or kept or broken super majorities. We won, the state houses. Actually, there wasn't that much. As a matter of fact, I think we did better overall than Republicans did overall in most of the state houses. That's where the laws are going to go right now, right? Like those sorts
Right.
of things. So now, I mean, that is that, but that to me, the reason I bring this up is that because I think that speaks to some of the messaging too, is that we all, and I say we all, and I take myself as part of this, um, we all get wrapped up in just the top of the ticket, just the biggest thing, just the sound bite. And we do have to talk to people about that, right? Because before we hit record, I was talking about my kid who's 24. Um, no way around it. He's not getting, even though NPR is always on at the house, he's getting his information from a different place. And so we do have to figure out how to use those medias. And again, I don't think I'm the right demographic. But I also think that I want to continue to fund the people who may be able to give the right amount of messaging, the right messaging, or right is that, to give a different view and something that they can speak to, that I can't. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know, that doesn't really answer your question, Brian, but it's one of the things I've been really thinking about, how to bring it from the big level down to the more, macro. So,
Well, I saw that on the MVP analysis that you just
yeah,
the one of the things that you're talking about is doing the legislatures. I mean, that's important, and it made a difference in North Carolina. I mean, they don't control
huge.
the legislature, but they now, with the new governor, they have a chance to back him up because they can negate a supermajority that would
That's right.
so there are different pieces, and I think this Loco Foco was an organization years ago. This was in the 1830s that started. It was a populist organization. It had some racist, unfortunately, tints to it, but they were going to basically do their politics locally. And after the McGovern campaign, a bunch of folks in the Detroit area, Michigan, myself and some included, we put together an organization similar to that, where we're going to start at the local level, where we're going to do school board races, where we're going to do county commissioner races, where we're going to do all of that to build the community that you talked about and to aid those communities as well. That was before there was all this money that was going into TV. So I want to ask you, can I ask a question, Brian?
Yeah.
I want to ask you, he's my counselor, my advisor, on the question of the Latino community and the Trump idea of rounding them up, and is a very, very serious one, and we're going to face it, as you say, I think, probably sooner than later. We have an organization in DC. It's called the Washington Office on Latin America. Maybe you know it. It's called WOLA. It's been around since the Letelier murder in the Allende case back in 1974, I believe. So, a great organization, and some of our my chief of staff for many years, Kathy Gurley, is a board member there. So we still work with them in terms of issues dealing with Latin America, and so we're obviously very worried about what's going to happen. But if you build community with them, like WOLA has and other places, you have a place where you can take care of them, help them, guide them, shield them, and then activate in resistance against what's going to happen to them. So what's happening in Illinois? I know it's been a large Hispanic community in Illinois, and I just was interested in what's the latest in terms of what's happening to deal with all of this now.
I think people are trying to figure that out. We have a pretty strong immigrant coalition. There's the Illinois ICER, Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights.
Yeah.
That's sort of an umbrella group that has it's been a great organizing hub. And I'm sure there's a lot of conversation happening. Jackie, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think ISO would be the place to talk about what's happening in Illinois. I'm not sure what's going. I mean, I think that one of the things I'm hearing about Illinois in general is really trying to figure out how we continue to be sort of a sanctuary state. I think we're going to be a sanctuary state for immigrants, for migrants, for the LGBT community, for people who have uteruses, for women, for other, and so I think that that sort of, yeah, I mean, we will become more and more of a hub. My worry about some of that, though, is as long as we have an electoral map, one, I worry about it, one, from an electoral perspective. If we continue to move anyone who's blue into sort of blue pockets, right? The map becomes more solid, and there becomes less purple, and it becomes more, more complicated for a win, right? In that sense. So that's on a big level if we're talking about presidential. But on a human level, to not have any people who think differently, right? That becomes then Brian, in some ways, your previous question is then we're talking into echo chambers, right? We're not meeting the people of difference. From an LGBT community, when we were losing the argument around marriage a lot, one of the big things, in addition to understanding we needed to go through the courts, which I think, as we've seen, most, if not all, civil rights movements have understood that they need to go through the courts. This Supreme Court feels like it might be a little work against us, not bending the arc towards justice. But we also understood, and that was one of the things, Lambda and other groups were very specific at who they chose, because they wanted people who, they were thoughtful in making sure that the people who were chosen for the cases were diverse enough and relatable enough that people could start to feel like they knew people. And National Coming Out Day, all of that was around everybody getting to know that they knew somebody gay, right? And that we weren't, and then getting to know couples, and we weren't destroying, their worlds and all of that. And what about if everybody really understood the level at which, and of course this is too dangerous to do now, the level at which we really rely on migrant work, immigrant working, the level at which people in our communities and taking care of different things for us, and who we're meeting with, and taking care of our kids and all of that, but I think if we continue to be really these sort of internal refugees for different issues, we could lose that and I don't know, become even more divided. And so That's why I keep thinking the messaging is still, to me, one conversation at a time. I don't want to think I'm not Pollyanna-ish. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not Pollyannish, and I really struggle with this, and it would be interesting to have somebody who was younger on this conversation. I think I think our kids are lonely, you know? I think our kids are really too much time spent on screen, too much time
Mhm.
thinking, that some of these who am I to say that these aren't real relationships people are making online, right? To me, no, the way you meet a friend is you go out for coffee or you go out for a drink or you go, that sort of thing. Um, so I don't know. I think there's a real issue around community um, and also community being fueled around something positive as opposed to anger. And I don't, um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't the kids are not necessarily I mean, in one sense, I wanna tell you that these kids that and the ones whether it be kids, and I mean that in the 20s and 30s because I'm older, but, the people who are like our children's age, they're doing amazing stuff that they are going to far surpass us, and they are thinking about things in a different way, and I am just awed and learning. And on the other hand, I'm really worried that there's a mental health and loneliness crisis and over information overload and anxiety, where the kids are not all right, you know?
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
lot of that is about the information being spread and, communities being built in these silos you're talking about, and I don't know how to break through that.
Well, we've hit our 40th minute mark and we try to do a 30-minute show. So we know we've had a rich conversation here, but I feel like we're just scratched the surface. But a quick summary, I think would be go grassroots, build build person at a time. That still works. And I think if you look at the election results, you do see where grassroots dollars went in the swing states. They did better. The progressive senators actually won in Tammy Baldwin and Rosen, right? And Gallego in
I
Arizona. And if you actually look at it compared to the non-swing states, we actually did worse. That's a kind of a story we got to get into another day, David. It's like nationally, swing states
Yeah.
kind of did better because of this grassroots work we did. And then another point of hope, I think, Jackie, that you give me is making me think this is 2004 again. And when Karl Rove made gay marriage, the centerpiece of Beat
Yeah,
and Carry. And then the organizers went back and they reframed their strategy. That's a whole nother episode or two, and ended up winning. Gay marriage was passed about 7 years later, right? With a state by state, with a different organizing and messaging strategy. So I see some hope here. I think we have to have some younger guests on next week, David. Maybe we'll tap our family members.
yeah.
Jackie,
Well,
you got some younger guests for us because I think we got to tackle this question that
Yeah,
we
actually, I
struggled
do
with.
have some probably younger guests for you since, I am definitely, a grandma at, Movement Voter not totally. There's a few people older than me, but when you're getting to that point where people say things like, "Oh my god, your son went to college a few years, after me," and I was like, "Whoa." So, yes, I would love to. I'd love to tap you into some younger people.
yeah.
That'd be great. Well, have a wonderful Sunday, Jackie. Thanks so much for being a guest today.
Oh, this was absolutely my pleasure. Take good care, and David, so good to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Keep up the good work.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.